Lobster restaurant in Maine got their lobster high because they thought it would make the lobster feel better before they got put in the lobster pot and turned into like a lobster roll or your dinner. Yeah?
Robin said, "Oh, joy."
Yeah, you know, exactly. So I can't really quite read the verbiage, but I put this in another presentation. So this restaurant owner did this. And then there was actually a college in Maine that the biology researchers actually did a little side project on how does that affect the lobster when they're going in the pot. So I think that's pretty funny. But you can put THC in just about anything these days. But why are we here? What's this presentation about? Is more the safety of the cannabis and hemp space, good manufacturing practices. In the state of Michigan now, they're requiring SOPs or procedures in place for what you're doing, how you're growing, how you're manufacturing. And a lot of that comes under the concept of what's called good manufacturing practices or GMPs. This has been around for years. The federal government actually started this program back in the 60s through what's called the CFRs, Code of Federal Regulations. And it really boils down to just a lot of common sense food safety. A lot of this, in our industry has been kind of the Wild West. Some states right now don't have any of these regulations in place. Some states have limited regulations. I think Michigan's on track to, be doing the right thing. For instance, in the state of Maryland right now, if you're doing gummies or edibles under 10 milligrams, the state will come in and just do an inspection of your location and allow you to, do typical production. If you're going to do doses above 10 milligrams, which in Maryland is considered medicinal, they up the ante where you have to have a certified GMP audit done, which the Perry Johnson companies can do. And they also require that you have dietary supplement certification and pharmaceutical level certification, which we can also do. And so they really up the game on that. Is it too much? Some people could say it is. But that market for those doses can be sold at regular dispensaries. So, those size doses are being sold pretty heavily right now in Maryland. So what leads to, problems with recalls? What leads to these situations, which is why you want to have a GMP program in place? A lot of the things we've seen in the industry that come out of recall issues, testing labs, things of that nature, molds, yeasts, pesticides, heavy metals, pathogens, things that can come out at the testing level that can then be remediated, but may have gotten through somehow and gotten onto the shelf or could have the wrong packaging. Wrong packaging doesn't mean that you have a bad product. It could just be labeled incorrectly or doesn't have the right metric information or where it was tested or when. So these are just some things. This is all freely available online. Pennsylvania just issued a huge recall on vape cartridges, which are legal in Pennsylvania and many other states, but the state of Pennsylvania determined that the ingredients going into the vape cartridges weren't approved by the FDA for inhalable ingredients. So now there are literally hundreds and hundreds. I know you can't read this, but these are each one of these is a different flavor, a different company, a different type of vape cartridge that are now off the shelves in Pennsylvania. So it's causing a pretty big disruption there. Here's another mercury levels. This was from a particular grow in Colorado just not too long ago in November. All their stuff off the shelf. So what happens to your brand if you're getting a recall? Right? All of a sudden that's out on social media, and that brand and that information you've worked hard to grow could be affected by this. This is out of Arizona. This is the lab screwed up. And so something happened with their testing methods last summer, and it affected a bunch of brands, but it was the lab's fault, not the customer's fault. So they had to scramble to try and defend all these brand names. Here's another one in Nevada, 30 dispensaries. Actually, that's Reno. I thought it was Vegas, but it's Reno. So all these things. Here's one.
What are they seeing as violations?
So, I mean, different violations could be, like I mentioned earlier, the packaging, the testing results were incorrect, heavy metals, all kinds of things. There's another one in Arizona. Different types of pre-rolls. So, you know, what is a responsibility producer, right? Try to grow your product safely, implement the appropriate controls, which we'll get into, and you gotta have the whole company on board, even if it's one person up to 20. Once you're starting to say, hey, we're gonna put a GMP program in place, everyone's gotta be on board because there's probably gonna be a little bit of paperwork, there's probably gonna be different ways of doing things and documenting things and sanitizing and such. But it can be done, and hundreds of companies have done it. So what I mentioned before about the Code of Federal Regulations, there's a lot of acronyms. You can see the CFR. So Code of Federal Regulations covers thousands of items, but really within the cannabis and hemp space, you're going to hear, hey, are you guys CFR 110? Are you guys CFR 111? Those are the big ones for the cannabis and hemp space for food safety. The other ones I mentioned before in Maryland is CFR 210 and 211. Those are dietary supplements and pharmaceutical level. It's just a matter of time before this is implemented in all 50 states when it goes federally legal. They're going to come back to these CFR regulations, and that's what's going to be required. I mean, that's my opinion, but these things are already in place, and most likely they're going to come down the pipeline for that. So it's interesting because with the Code of Federal Regulations and food safety, what is allowable, right? What is safe food? What does the federal government allow you to go into your food right now, right? So for instance, here's a pretty interesting one, apple butter, right? So as long as your mold count is 12% or less, you can sell your apple butter. Think about that, okay? You can have an average of 4 or more rodent hairs per 100 grams of apple butter. So you can have some, you know, you can have some mouse droppings in there. You can have some rodent hair. That's allowable, right? It's impossible to have 0, but it's pretty interesting. 5 or more whole or equivalent insects, not counting mites, aphids, thrips, or scale, right? Here's another one for chocolates. Yeah, as long as your average is 60 or more insect fragments per 100 grams or less, you can have a couple, you know, insect shells or something float around the chocolate. That's still allowable, and you're not going to fail. So what's going to happen in the cannabis space when it goes legal, right? What are they going to say for edibles? You know, can you have this in your edibles? Can you have this in your pre-rolls? Can you have this in your vape cartridges? It'll be interesting to see how this crosses over for what's allowable for apple butter, what's going to happen in marijuana. And these CFRs, you can look this up online for whatever your favorite food is, there's a requirement. Popcorn, ice cream, all this has a certain allowable amount of nasty stuff that's allowed in it. So how do you know you're getting clean product out to your dispensaries, out to the field? What I mentioned before about ISO 17025, that is the industry standard for testing labs to be accredited to provide those tests. For instance, in the state of Michigan, you know, heavy metals, pathogens, yeast, potency, the terpenes, the pesticides. How often is the sampling conducted? Who does the sampling, right? In Oklahoma, the grower can bring the sample to the lab. With all due respect to any growers in here, but you know, how do you know who's, you know, what sample is going to the lab? Maybe you had aphids in the back 40. You're not going to bring that sample in. You're just going to bring the best stuff in so your batch can get approved. In Michigan and other states, the labs will come and take an independent sample, you know, to get your testing one approved. Cannabis packaging, right? This is huge in all states. Each state has different rules, but for the most part, you need to label what the THC level is, where it was produced, what type of product. Obviously, you know, it can't appeal to minors. You've got to have child-resistant packaging. So these are a lot of things that
believe it or not, we were talking about before, can cause a recall. If something's wrong with your packaging and it slips through, you can get a recall for that. If you have a bad test result or something after the fact comes back as the lab screwed up their test results, things are coming off the shelf. This next picture is probably not somebody you think about for child-resistant packaging or products, and if you know what's going on here, don't mention it, because I just found out about this a week ago. But you might know this guy. He's Tyson 2.0, Mike Tyson, former boxer. He's got a hugely successful brand right now. And in 1997, when he was fighting Evander Holyfield, you guys all remember the situation when he, bit Evander Holyfield's ear, okay? He now has, it's called Mike Bites. So, okay, these are actual THC-infused gummies molded after Evander Holyfield's ear that are a real product right now that you can buy. And, however, they're banned in Colorado because it looks like, a kid's, it's, a human body part, like a kid's candy or a hand or something like that. So in Colorado, they're illegal because it's a human ear. But yeah, you can get a 10 milligram Evander Holyfield ear right now in California, a lot of the western states. In Michigan, in Colorado, he's actually going to have a T for Mike Tyson that's going to replace this, but I thought this was pretty hilarious. As of yesterday, when I was double checking my research on this, because this just came out April 4th, Evander Holyfield hasn't made any comments. He's not trying to take a cut of this. He hasn't tried to, get his portion of the year.
A portion.
So yeah, it never ceases to amaze me. I can't make this stuff up.
Do you already know if the ear is going to fly in Michigan?
That's a great question. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah, there's nothing out there, so.
Certainly not gonna clear back.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that'll be interesting to see. So in terms of, how all these, getting certified, right? What does that mean? So we're a third-party certification body. So we actually get audited ourselves as to our competency to come in and do an audit for you. Most audits, for like a good manufacturing practices audit or good agriculture and collection practices, are about a day to maybe a day and a quarter, depending on the size of your operation. And so our checklist, which is a nationally recognized checklist, it's based on food safety standards that are already out there in the industry. We didn't invent this, like the Code of Federal Regulations we spoke about before. So we put this checklist together to cover the cannabis and hemp space, and it's been accepted and used in all major states right now that have a legitimate cannabis a cannabis program in place.
This is geared more toward processing though, correct?
Well, we'll get into that, but these, in Michigan, good agriculture and collection practices, or GACP, that's required if you're selling clones or anything under 8 inches to other growers. And then for processors, once the harvest is done and you're basically drying, trimming, either going to biomass or doing cone rolls or wholesale flour, that's where the concept of GMP or good manufacturing practices comes into play. So for instance, in Michigan, where they're requiring that you have SOPs in place, that's really the precursor to having a GMP certificate, because good manufacturing practices, part of it has, do you have standard operating procedures? And they can be as simple or as extensive as you want. Do you have a plan for pest control? Do you have a plan for sanitation? Do you document how you train your employees? Things of that nature. So again, there's a lot of acronyms here, but ANSI is the national group that comes in to approve certification bodies. So it's not just for cannabis and hemp. This is for the automotive industry, for aerospace, medical devices, things like that. So as your companies grow and you're learning more about this, yeah, we got a GMP certificate. Well, just because somebody came in and did a GMP walk around and issued you a certificate, that still could be valuable and you could learn from it. But if it's not from a legitimate certification body, it's probably not going to meet the requirements of the state or back you up in a recall or something like that. So basically, the whole concept of GMP is based on 5 different points here, all with a P. Your people, your premises, your processes, your products, and your procedures. And I also like to say the other one out of all this is profit. So if you're following this and putting forth a good faith effort, then you're going to be able to achieve certification for this. And at the end of this, we'll go over our checklist, which is available to download on our website. And that's an important part of getting GMP certified is, you know, a lot of people, how do we even start this? Like, where do we begin? You start with a checklist, right? What are you being certified to? You review the checklist, you know what those points are, you know what you're going to be required to ask and give that. A couple of these things down here that have come up kind of in my experience with being in a lot of grows and producers and such. The insurance industry right now, last year we got approached by 3 insurance companies about GMP certification and who's getting that. And so if you get GMP certified, chances are you're going to be able to negotiate with your insurance company to get lower rates, because they actually came to us to say we're trying to only insure companies that have some type of a GMP certification in place to lower their risk levels. And so now that the state of Michigan is requiring procedures, it's the same thing. And we actually did a webinar with one of those companies, and I asked them, because I was curious, so what are you getting, like, what's the biggest insurance claim in the cannabis industry right now? By far the number one is a recall for product liability, and the second one was laboratories were actually being broken into for security issues. So the bad guys thought that if they broke into a lab, they're going to get a lot of product and samples, and that's not what's happening, because in a lab, you know, you only have a few samples to be tested, but they never took any of the multi-million-dollar testing equipment, which I found pretty interesting. Security, also a big thing that comes up with insurance and also just in general. Last year I was at a grow in Michigan, who I'm not going to name, and I was talking with the owner. We were in their conference room and going over the process of certification, and which also leads up to water bottles. They had one of their employees basically quit, and on the way out the door, that employee let them know that during the process of trimming, they let people, you know, bring in water bottles, right? And they found blank spots or crossover spots on the cameras, and they were filling up their Yeti bottles with bud and leaving every day. So how much bud can you fit in a Yeti bottle? Times 12 people every day for an unknown amount of time, 6, 8, 9, 12 months. So the trimmers are basically kind of tipping themselves out every day on in their water bottles. And that was a huge security lapse that they had. And so now it's only clear water bottles that they provide, and they double checked all their camera angles because there was a lot of theft going on, which I found you know, pretty interesting. You also hear EMP plans come up sometimes in good manufacturing practices. EMP is Environmental Monitoring Plan. If you're a producer or you're extracting things of that nature, same thing with food safety, E. coli, salmonella, listeria. When's the last time you did a swab on a drain in your facility or at your grow, just to know, right? So this comes back to recalls. If you get a recall for mold, mildew, or yeast, or something wrong with one of your products, you can say, hey, look, we're maintaining a good manufacturing practices plan here. We're maintaining environmental monitoring, things of this nature. Chances are you're not going to get hit as hard by the state, and you'll have more backing from your insurance if you have those things in place, because you're putting forth a good faith effort versus not doing anything. The zoo. This is another one that came up. I was in Colorado Springs, which is medical only because of the military is there, and also the Olympic training facilities. So I was getting a tour of a grow there, and in one of the secondary rooms, kind of the mid-level grow room, it didn't smell like bud. It kind of smelled like a zoo. And I looked on the floor, and there was a bunch of
carrot chunks and these little brown nuggets. And I'm looking, and in the back of the room is a tortoise, a huge tortoise. I'm like, what's going on here? He's like, yeah, that's Jose. That's our security tortoise. I'm like, you just let him cruise around your grow room? He goes, oh yeah, well, we mop that up every day. And I mean, there was tortoise poop and little carrot chunks all over the grow. And this was 3 years ago. I thought that was pretty interesting. I'll never forget that. So I needed to bring that one up. So, you know, how can you be ready for a GMP audit? And the important thing to remember here is that this is not audit like an IRS audit. It's not necessarily a pass-fail as much as, you know, what are the corrective actions, right? What came out of the wash from the audit? What do you need to do to fix it? Usually that's done in writing. It's very rare that we have a complete, you know, failure of a GMP audit unless the company is just really rushing, and you know, not a good faith effort. So we talked about having the correct checklist. You want to do a pre-assessment meeting, or what's also called an internal audit. Somebody on your team basically takes the checklist, walks around your facility, and be honest with each other about what the shortcomings are and what you need to fix. You can also have a private third party come in or a consultant do that for you. And while you're doing that, you're reviewing and implementing these requirements. You're going to train your employees. We just talked about the internal audit, and then anything that came out of the wash from that you need to fix, it's called a corrective action. So you just document those and put those things in place. In terms of the process of how this works on our end, you would you're going to choose which certification body that you want to work with and go under contract. You're going to get scheduled, right? So we don't tell you, just because you go under contract with us today, we're not going to say, hey, we're going to be there in 30 days. You tell us when you think you're going to be ready, if you need 60 days, 90 days, what have you, to get these things in place. You'll do your pre-assessment, either internally or have somebody else. You're going to have the audit done. What happens during an audit? Usually an opening meeting with the auditor, all the major players, there's a list of who was there. The auditor is going to review your procedures, your quality manual, things like that. Then they're going to walk your facility and take a look at everything. Once that's done, they're going to give you a list of, what happened during the visit, during the audit. I mean, we're all human, there's going to be a few. You have 30 days to respond to those in writing. You don't have to have the auditor come back in person to review everything, unless it's a complete failure case. I think last year in 2021, out of a couple hundred of these we did, there were maybe 3 that were just a total, travesty that probably should have never had their audit in the first place, which is something we learn from, right? So now the concept of a pre-assessment or an internal audit, we're not going to come out and do your audit until you give us a copy of your internal audit to show that you actually have done something to make an effort to have us be ready to come out there, because we have had to do some where we turned the official audit into basically a practice run and had to reschedule because folks weren't ready. And then you get your certification. GMP certification or GAP certification, it's good for a year. It's renewable each year. So each year you would have a recertification audit. Obviously, the longer you're doing this and maintaining it, it's going to become easier to maintain. It's just part of your business, part of your day in and day out that you're doing. So you're probably going to have less corrective actions, but the concept is that you're increasing your quality, you're keeping things going. So why get certified? What are the benefits? We talked about before. You're going to mitigate risks to public health, knowing that your product is clean on the shelves. You're going to increase consumer confidence. You can probably lower whatever you're paying for insurance and keep your risk levels low. You're going to stay ahead of the competition right now. If right now you're a grower or a producer and you don't have any kind of SOPs in place or any kind of anything moving towards GMP, I highly recommend doing it like next week, because the state of Michigan is right now their mantra is educate versus regulate. And that's not going to, that's not going to be forever. So I don't, they're going to have to, not that they're not doing their job, but I think they're going to be less patient with folks, and they're going to, now that they're kind of caught up with the process, they have other people on board, they're going to have folks that are, state auditors that can come out at any time and knock on the door unannounced and say, hey, show me your, your operations manual.
Have you had scenarios where, I work for a financial institution, so this is one of the biggest risks so far that we're trying to figure out what our true risk is when we go into finance a building or a grow facility or something like that, is how do we, if they lose their license or they have a huge recall, that's obviously a really big risk. And
right.
So have you been approached by either lending institutions or anything like that as far as this being a credit criteria? Like, does it help them get access to credit?
I think it should. We've been approached, like I said, by 3 or 4 insurance companies, and we've been approached by private lenders so that we would come out and do like a one-off audit, like a verification audit that wouldn't necessarily end up in a certificate, but hey, we want a third set of eyes, go check out this facility. Are these guys legit? We're about to lend them, $10 million or $5 million. So we'll do what we call a supplier audit. So yes, I think it's important, and we can talk about this after, but we'd be happy to validate those things, because if you're going to issue credit to somebody and they're already up and running, obviously that's important. And if they're not up and running, but they're going to be, do they have something like this in place?
Right. And that's where we're coming. We're trying to get educated here on how can we help them help us approve the loan,
right?
By making a condition of the approval, obtaining these certifications, or providing that as part of the business plan or what they've done to address this risk. The biggest risk, probably.
Absolutely.
Uniqueness of the facility.
Exactly. So those, that's why certification is important. And with a GMP certificate, if you're part of a company that's going to be like a multi-state operator, or you're going into other locations, this is scalable. So the same checklist, the same requirements you would meet in Michigan would work for you in Virginia, would work for you in South Carolina, or Colorado, or other places. So here's just a couple little blips from the actual checklist. Worker and health hygiene. It's amazing how many things like this, like wash your hands, right? Do you even have signs up to wash your hands? There was a pretty interesting study that I saw at another conference, and it's like workers are like 65% more likely to actually engage in washing their hands if there's a sign up versus not having a sign. And that's one of the big mantras at McDonald's, that you see that everywhere. And so I thought that was pretty interesting. That's a big thing that we have as a corrective action at an audit, or is signage about just basic OSHA stuff, washing your hands, things of that nature. Smoking and eating. Do you have actual areas set up for your employees? No, you can't vape while you're trimming. Things like that, which I've seen. First aid supplies, right? Just basic stuff like this. Hey, where's your first aid kit? Oh, it's in the desk drawer back in Susie's office. Okay, well that needs to be a little more out and open for everybody. Also, some of the indoor cultivation versus outdoor. This is measures are taken to exclude animals and pests in the growing areas. That's like goes right back to the killer tortoise that was in Colorado Springs. A lot of the things I've seen in a lot of the indoor grows are, the white epoxy floors, running, a tight ship with your plumbing. I've seen other places where there's hoses across the whole room, puddles of standing water, drains that are backed up. Where are you keeping your chemicals? Do you know the expiration dates of your fertilizers? Things of that nature. Glass, this is another one. Are you using actual glass light bulbs? Do you have shields under those? So God forbid if a light bulb breaks or comes down, is it contained? Things like that. So again, when we come out to do one of these audits, we will already have the state-specific requirements there as well as the basic GMP requirements, but it's also up to the company. So, the company, your attorney, whoever's your quality manager, whoever's on point for this, that person needs to, really be on point for this and, understand what these rules are. So another thing that we'll do is, which other certification bodies will do, is once we're in agreement with you, we'll give you what's called a pending letter of certification, which is on our letterhead. Depending on what state you're in, they may require that you're in process to get GMP certification as part of your provisional license. So that's something that we'll gladly do for you. And again, on our website at PGRFSI, we have all of our checklists for cannabis and hemp you can download. We just uploaded our new version in January, our GMP checklist 2.0, which is being used in Michigan right now, New York, Florida, Colorado, California. And that's it. So yeah, I'm Brett McMillen. If there's anything I can do, the information's on the website from the show. I know it's probably lunchtime for everybody, so hope you guys have a good rest of your 420 day, and be happy to answer any questions if anybody has any right now, or we can do that later.
Yeah, Brett, so about a little bit earlier, who's dividing line between GACP and CGMP with that facility?
Yes, that's a good question. So the GACP basically ends after the harvest. So when you're starting the process of drying and trimming, that's kind of the end of the good agricultural practices. And then once that part's done and it's starting to get packaged into like wholesale flour or biomass or ground up for home rolls or cone rolls, that's where it turns into more of a GMP type situation. So when we have companies that are vertically integrated doing both, it just kind of all flows together. But if you're just a processor and you're just receiving the biomass and you're not touching it, then that's where the GMP part starts. If you're a grower and you're getting it to the point where someone can buy it for dispensary, then that's where it ends. Basically after the trimming, as just the flour is getting packaged or it's getting processed for either biomass or going into a cone roll.
How do you price your services and what is the range for?
So that's a good point. So right now, like an average cannabis GMP certification is probably about $5,000 a year for the certification. Sometimes as high as $7,000, depending on how much of what you're doing, the size. And right now we're about 30 to 45 days out. So if you said, hey Brett, we need an audit as soon as possible, we're probably about 45 days out on being able to get an auditor to you. And then once the audit's done, you have 30 days to do your corrective actions. And we're about 30 days on processing everything. So in a perfect world, you could have this done in 90 days.
Next question, Brett. Is there any common deficiencies you see amongst cultivators and processors in terms of items not standard itself?
I would say one of the bigger things, like in terms of, is during the trimming, like hair nets, things like that, jewelry. Jewelry was a big thing last year because every year we review like what the trends are for the write-ups and the audits. It was definitely jewelry, necklaces, things like that can fall into the certain process. Specifically for cultivators, a lot of it was standing water hoses, being able to track HVAC filters and when they were switched, tracking fertilizer and chemicals, where you put those. Do you know when they expire? Do you keep them locked? Are they in a situation where if a jug spilled, would that get into any part of your process? Pest control was a big one too. Rat traps, do you even have them? Where are they? Are they next to the door? Do you have a pest control plan in place where yeah, hey, Dave walks around once a week and checks the traps. Okay, well, does Dave write that down? When's the last time a trap actually had some rodents in it? Do you check the bait, stuff like that? Most of the companies that I've kind of toured and walked through at some point end up using a third party like an Orkin or something like that just to, dilute the liability a bit.
Is there any specific reason that you want to pursue a GMP certification versus like an ISO 9001 cert?
So that's a great point, which we didn't really bring up in this discussion. So ISO 9001 is a great quality certification to have in place, but ISO 9001 is kind of like the baseline quality management system that you can have, and it complements GMP. So an ISO 9001 audit is not going to ask about your sanitation schedule or your pest control or anything like that. It's going to more review your business continuity and things of that nature, management review, customer complaints, things like that. Just like a GMP audit isn't going to ask when's the last time you had a management review, how are you handling quality, things of that nature. So
More of a compliment to it.
Exactly. So most of the companies that we quote that are of a certain level operation will do ISO 9001 with a GMP certificate. Usually the GMP part comes first because it's protecting your product and your chances of a recall, and ISO 9001 would usually go second, but not too far apart.
It's like reversing the auto industry.
Exactly. Yeah.